The Judgment was on the verge of collapse. Its shields were barely holding, and the hull groaned under the pressure of the Terrorized bombardment. Captain Alara Drake gripped the command chair, teeth clenched. The voice from the transmission, Commander Garrett, still echoed in her mind, a ghost from a past she thought was buried. "We can't hold out much longer, Captain," Lieutenant Quinn shouted, his voice strained as the ship rocked with another direct hit. Drake's eyes flicked to the display. The Terrorized flagship, once thought to be a lost relic of humanity, loomed large on the screen. And with it, the rest of their fleet, closing in from all sides. But it wasn't just the enemy ships she had to worry about. It was the message they had sent. Garrett, once a trusted officer in Earth's fleet, had somehow turned. She didn't know how or why, but the revelation was too damning to ignore. "Captain?" Quinn's voice broke through her thoughts. "Their fleet's preparing for a final push. We need to act now, while we still can." The pressure was building. The Judgment had been designed for offensive combat, but no one had ever expected it to face a full Terrorized fleet. The alien armada outnumbered them by 5-1, and their weaponry outclassed the Judgments in every way. But there was no turning back. If they didn't strike now, humanity's last hope would be extinguished, and Earth would fall to the hands of the Tyrexians. "Park," Drake barked, "give me everything we've got. Fire on their command ship, now." The weapons officer, his face pale and strained, nodded grimly. He punched in the firing sequence, and the Judgment's massive railguns roared to life. The entire ship shook as the first salvo launched, a devastating barrage that ripped through the space between them and the Terrorized flagship. A direct hit. For a moment there was a flicker of hope, then it was gone. The Terrorized flagship barely flinched. Its shields absorbed the blast without even a noticeable flicker. "Damn it," Park cursed, slamming his fist against his console. "Shields are too strong. We need to find a weakness." Drake's mind raced. She knew they couldn't win this battle with firepower alone. There had to be a way to get in close, to strike at the heart of the Terrorized flagship, to bring down their command structure. But that would mean risking everything. "Quinn, take us in," she ordered. "We're going to board their flagship." A brief moment of silence passed as the crew absorbed the weight of her words. "What?" Park's voice was disbelieving. "Captain, that's suicide. We can't." "I don't have time to explain." Drake snapped, cutting him off. "Do it, Quinn. Now." Quinn didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the console, and the Judgment surged forward with terrifying speed. Enemy fire erupted around them as they barreled toward the Terrorized flagship. The crew gritted their teeth, holding on for dear life as the ship bucked and rocked under fire. They were heading straight for certain death. But just as the Judgment neared the flagship's hull, the impossible happened. The enemy fleet didn't fire. Instead, the Tyrexians began pulling back, creating an opening. A single path through the chaos. "What the hell?" Quinn muttered, confusion evident in his voice. "They're letting us in?" Drake's pulse quickened. She knew this was too good to be true. There had to be a trap. But she couldn't afford to hesitate. They were already in motion. There was no turning back. "Keep going," Drake ordered, her voice unwavering. "They're waiting for us, but we're not stopping. Not now." But as they closed in, a new signal appeared on the display, one that made Drake's blood run cold. It wasn't from the Terrorized flagship. It was from Earth. From Command. The message was brief, but its meaning was clear. Asterisk abort mission. Reinforcements are coming. Asterisk. Drake's mind raced. Reinforcements? No, this was their only chance. If they pulled back now, they would lose everything. But then another message flashed on her screen, this one from the Anathema. "We're not alone, Captain." And before Drake could process the meaning, the screen went black. The trap was set. The silence of space was deafening, broken only by the low hum of the Judgment's engines as it hurtled towards the heart of the Terrorized fleet. Captain Alara Drake's heart beat in rhythm with the ship's movements, a steady, constant thrum that reminded her of the stakes. The first battle was over. The Tyrexians had underestimated them, but now the real test was coming. Across the command deck, tension was palpable. Each officer remained at their station, faces drawn and pale, every one of them well aware that they were playing a game with death. The Tyrexian Empire was notorious for its ruthlessness. They'd obliterated entire planets for defiance, and they wouldn't take kindly to a human warship suddenly challenging their reign. But no one expected what was coming next, not even Captain Drake. "We're within range of their flagship." Quinn's voice broke the silence, his fingers flying over the holographic console. His gaze was fixed on the tactical display, every movement precise and controlled. He paused for a moment, then glanced at Drake. It's bigger than we expected. Bigger than we expected? Drake's voice was cold, her focus razor-sharp. How is that possible? They don't have more firepower than us. Not even close. Quinn's face darkened. He quickly manipulated the data, bringing up a zoomed-in image of the Terrorized flagship. The vessel wasn't just a warship, it was an industrial fortress bristling with weapons, defensive shields, and a hull so thick it could survive even a direct hit from a full barrage of human energy weapons. But it wasn't just the size that made Quinn's heart race, it was the signature. The markings on the hull weren't Terrorized. They were human. Drake's breath caught in her throat as she leaned over the console, her eyes narrowing. That's not possible. This can't be one of ours. It's not, Quinn replied grimly. At least not one of our warships. But it looks like someone's been busy. The signature matches a lost human colony ship, the Anathema. Drake's mind reeled. The Anathema had vanished years ago, a colony ship sent to explore an uncharted sector. It was supposed to have been lost in a freak hyperspace anomaly. A fleet of warships had been dispatched to search for survivors, but no one had ever found a trace of it. Until now. You're saying the Tyrexians captured the Anathema? She asked, her voice low and steady. But inside her mind was racing. If that ship had somehow survived and was now being used by the Tyrexians. They didn't just capture it, Quinn said. They rebuilt it. Converted it into a flagship. Drake felt her stomach tighten. This revelation changed everything. If the Tyrexians were using a converted human warship, then this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for the future of humanity itself. But there was no time to dwell on it. The Tyrexians had detected them. The flagship's massive energy cannons had already powered up, and the first volley of deadly plasma bolts shot out, streaking through the void like the wrath of a vengeful god. Brace for impact. Drake shouted, instinctively gripping the sides of her command chair. The ship lurched violently as the Judgment as shields flared to life, absorbing the first wave of attacks. The force of the blast sent a shockwave through the hull, knocking loose a few of the crew, but they recovered quickly, locking down their stations. We're taking damage, shouted Commander Park, the weapons officer. Shields at 70%, but we're still holding. Drake's eyes narrowed. The Judgment had been designed to take a beating, but they couldn't afford to take too many hits from that monstrosity. Her mind raced, calculations flying through her head faster than she could process them. They had one shot at this, one chance to knock the Tyrexians off balance before they were overwhelmed by the sheer size of the fleet. Quinn, get us in close. I want a direct line to their power core, she ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. Quinn didn't hesitate. He was already working, maneuvering the ship with impressive precision. The Judgment's thrusters roared as it accelerated, cutting through the void and weaving in and out of enemy fire. We're too close to their fleet. They'll swarm us. Park warned, eyes wide as he watched the approaching Tyrexian ships on his console. We have no choice. Drake snapped, her eyes locked on the flagship. Do it now, Quinn. With a final, calculated push, the Judgment's engines flared, and the ship shot forward, the hull vibrating from the strain. A massive blast erupted from one of the Tyrexian cruisers, barely missing the human warship as it narrowly dodged. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The Tyrexian fleet, so confident in their dominance, was thrown into disarray. But in the chaos, something else happened. A flash, bright and blinding, flared from the flagship. The message was clear: you are too late. You have no idea what you've just awakened. Before Drake could react, the flagship unleashed its devastating weapon, a beam of pure, focused energy that tore through the Judgment's shields and struck the hull. The entire ship shuddered as alarms blared. Lights flickered. And then the transmission came in, not from the Tyrexian commander, but from a single voice, familiar, human. Captain Drake, it's been a long time. Drake's blood ran cold. That voice, she recognized it. It was one she hadn't heard in years, a ghost from her past. And it could only mean one thing: the Anathema had never been lost. It had been waiting. Commander Garrett? Drake whispered, her voice barely audible. The warship Judgment had just encountered the impossible. The galaxy trembled in the shadow of the Tyrexian Empire. For centuries they had spread like a plague across the stars, unstoppable, merciless, and insatiable. Worlds fell to their might, civilizations erased, and any resistance crushed beneath the weight of their war machines. In the distant corners of space, whispers of defiance were quickly silenced, suffocated by the cold void. No one dared oppose them. Until now. The human warship, Judgment, slipped silently through the void, a lone shadow amongst the stars. Inside its sleek hull, every crew member braced for what was to come. Captain Elara Drake stood at the command console, staring out into the infinite expanse. 100 lights blinked across the main display, tracking enemy fleet movements, monitoring hyperspace shifts, and analyzing intelligence reports. Yet, despite the heavy weight of the mission, her expression was cold, unwavering. "You're thinking about it again?" A voice broke through her thoughts. Drake didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could feel Lieutenant Quinn's presence at her shoulder, could almost hear the concern in his voice. He was the one who had trained her, the one who had always been by her side in moments like this. They had faced impossible odds together, and she had come to trust him implicitly. But this was different. This wasn't some skirmish or territorial dispute. This was the beginning of humanity's fight for its place in the galaxy. "This isn't like any other mission," she finally replied, her voice low but steady. "The Tyrexians are more than just an enemy. They're a symbol of everything that's wrong with this galaxy. And if we fail, if we fall, then no one is safe." Quinn nodded but didn't speak. He knew her better than anyone. The Tyrexians had destroyed civilizations that had existed long before humanity even thought to look beyond its own world. They had conquered entire sectors with the ease of a predator hunting prey. And worse, they had built an empire that instilled fear in every race, from the insectoid Zorith to the ancient Nkai, the once proud warriors of the Southern Rim. The human race was the last to enter this brutal stage of galactic history, and now they were the last hope. A soft chime sounded, signaling the approach of the Tyrsien fleet. Drake's heart raced, though her face remained an impenetrable mask of determination. She turned to Quinn, who was already tapping commands into his console, bringing up the enemy ships on the display. "Fleet size, 25 dreadnoughts, 32 cruisers, and God knows how many smaller vessels. They've probably detected us already," Quinn reported, his eyes scanning the readouts. Drake's jaw tightened. They had calculated the Tyrexians would be waiting, prepared for an invasion. Humanity's forces were far smaller, with only a handful of ships capable of mounting any kind of meaningful resistance. But they had something the Tyrexians didn't: innovation. The Judgment was a masterpiece of human engineering, a warship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was humanity's last card, a ship that could change the tide of war. "We're entering their zone of control," Drake said, eyes never leaving the viewport. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing in. "We give them no chance to respond. We strike hard, strike fast, and make them remember who they're dealing with." Quinn didn't need any further orders. He activated the ship's weapons systems, bringing the full arsenal of advanced technologies online. The hum of the ship's power surged through the deck, a resonating sound of anticipation. All systems were go. The Judgment lurched as it entered real space just outside the Tyrsien command fleet. Drake's heart pounded in her chest. She had trained for this moment for years, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. The galaxy was watching. The Tyrexians would never believe that a single human ship, one lone vessel, could challenge their supremacy. But the time for fear was over. A signal flashed on the display, and Drake's grip tightened around the armrests of her chair. It was a message from the Tyrsien flagship. The words that appeared were simple, but their meaning was clear. Asterisk, your efforts are futile. Surrender or be destroyed. Asterisk. Futile? Drake muttered under her breath, lips curling into a smile of grim determination. "We'll see about that." She turned to her crew, all eyes focused on her now. "Prepare for combat. They may have the numbers, but we have the advantage of surprise. We're not just here to fight. We're here to win." The order was given, and the crew moved swiftly into action. Weapons powered up. Shields activated. The Judgment glided into position, its guns aimed directly at the Tyrsien dreadnoughts. The battle was about to begin. And this time humanity would not bow. In the cold darkness of space, one human warship stood defiant. And the Tyrexians would learn just how wrong they were to underestimate Earth. The cold silence of space felt suffocating as Captain Elara Drake stood at the command console, her hands trembling ever so slightly. The Judgment's systems had gone dark. A moment ago they were charging toward the Tyrsien flagship, ready to strike, but now they were blind. The enemy had cut their communication and scrambled their sensors in an instant. They were completely isolated. "Captain, we've lost all comms." Quinn's voice broke through the silence, tense and clipped. "No incoming signals. No outgoing signals. We're flying blind." Drake's mind raced. The Anathema's message had been clear. The trap was set. And now they were stuck in the heart of enemy territory with no way to call for help. "We need to regain control," Drake said, voice steady despite the mounting pressure. "Park, find the Tyrsien flagship's weak points. I want to know where we can hit them hardest." Park's face was taut, his eyes flickering across multiple displays. "I'm working on it, Captain, but the flagship's hull is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's reinforced, almost impervious to direct fire." Drake's jaw tightened. The Tyrexians had always been ruthless, but this was something else. They weren't just fighting an empire, they were fighting a nightmare that had learned from humanity's own mistakes. The anathema was the key. Somehow, the Tyrexians had exploited humanity's own technology and turned it against them. "Captain," Park said urgently, snapping Drake out of her thoughts. "I've found something. A weakness in the flagship's power conduits, just below the main reactor. If we hit it right, we can destabilize their entire system. But we'd have to get close. Really close." Drake's mind flashed back to the anathema's transmission, the haunting familiarity of Garrett's voice. If the Tyrexians had truly reconstructed the colony ship, then the anathema held knowledge they could never have imagined. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for control of humanity's future. "Quinn," Drake said, her voice low, "bring us in closer. We're going to take that shot." Quinn hesitated for a split second before nodding grimly. "Understood, Captain. Hold on." The Judgment lurched as Quinn pushed the ship forward with reckless abandon. They darted through the remnants of the Tyrsien fleet, narrowly avoiding blasts that erupted in the vacuum around them. The Judgment's hull shuddered with every near miss, but they kept pushing forward, cutting through the chaos with a single goal in mind, the flagship. The tension in the air was suffocating, as if the entire universe was holding its breath. They were so close now. Too close. Park's voice rang out again. "Target locked. But Captain, it's not just the flagship anymore. There's something else, something coming from the flagship. A ship, large, much larger than any Tyrsien warship I've seen." Drake's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What ship?" Park didn't answer immediately. His eyes widened as he scrolled through his console. It's a human ship. It's the anathema." Drake's heart stopped. The anathema, the ship they had thought lost to the void. The ship that had been presumed dead. It wasn't destroyed. It had been rebuilt. And now it was on a direct collision course with the Judgment. "Brace for impact." Quinn shouted, but Drake was already moving, her mind calculating their next move. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was a blinding flash of light, a streak of fire coming from the unknown human vessel. And the unmistakable sound of human voices on the comms. "This is Commander Garrett. You've come too far, Alara. You can't stop this now." The trap had sprung. The universe seemed to freeze as the Judgment shuddered, its engines flaring briefly before losing power. Captain Alara Drake gripped her console, her body stiff with the impact. The mysterious human warship, the anathema had struck them without warning, its weapons tearing through their shields like paper. And now, with communication still down, the fate of humanity hung in the balance. "Status report." Drake barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. Lieutenant Quinn's voice came back sharp with urgency. "Hull integrity at 40%, Captain. Shields are down. We're taking on water. Power surges all over the ship." Drake's mind raced. The anathema, the colony ship they had presumed lost, had somehow become an instrument of the Tyrexians. And its commander, Garrett, the once loyal officer who had disappeared years ago, was now their greatest threat. The unthinkable had just become their worst nightmare. "Can we restore comms?" she asked, trying to regain some semblance of control. "We're trying, but it'll take time," Quinn replied. "Captain, we've got another problem. Tyrsien reinforcements just entered the system. A full dreadnought fleet, led by Emperor Zlar himself." Drake's blood went cold at the mention of the Emperor's name. Zlar, the tyrant who had united the Tyrsien Empire with a brutal iron fist. His reputation was legendary, a being who had crushed dozens of species without mercy, with the galaxy's most powerful fleet at his disposal. And now that fleet was descending upon them. The Judgment was crippled, and now a full Tyrsien armada was closing in. If they didn't act quickly, they would be nothing more than a smoldering wreck in the cold void of space. "We don't have time to repair the ship," Drake muttered, glancing around the command deck. She could see the faces of her crew, etched with fear and exhaustion. But none of them flinched. They were humanity's last line of defense, and they had no choice but to fight back. "Prepare to engage the enemy fleet. We may be outgunned, but they haven't seen what we're capable of. Quinn's expression hardened. You're talking about engaging Zlaris' fleet with a ship that's on the verge of falling apart? Drake didn't answer immediately. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but there was no other choice. They had to hit the Tyrexians with everything they had: surprise, speed, and ingenuity. The moment the order was given, the crew sprang into action. Park began reactivating the weapon systems, pushing every last reserve of power to the main cannons. But the Tyrexians were already on the move, their ships forming tight formations, preparing to overwhelm them. As the Judgment's remaining engines sputtered to life, Drake felt a pulse of adrenaline. It was a long shot, perhaps the longest of her career, but if she could find a way to get close enough to land a single decisive blow on Zlaris' flagship, they might just have a chance. But just as the Judgment accelerated toward the enemy, a new, terrifying signal appeared on her console. "Captain, something's wrong," Park said, his voice tight with disbelief. "The signal, it's coming from the anathema, and it's not human." Drake's stomach twisted in a knot. "What are you saying?" "The ship's not just a converted human vessel, Captain. It's been weaponized using Tyrexian technology. And it's now under the direct control of Emperor Zlar." Drake's breath caught. It was worse than she had imagined. The Tyrexians had used Garrett, and humanity's own lost ship, as a weapon. But they had no time to process the implications. Zlaris' fleet was already bearing down on them. "Brace for impact," Quinn shouted as the first wave of Tyrexian fire lit up the darkness. The Judgment rocked violently as enemy blasts tore through their hull. The crew screamed in pain as the ship's system screamed in protest. But through the chaos, Drake's eyes remained locked on the tactical display. Zlaris' flagship was still there, its massive form looming large. She knew this would be the hardest battle of her life. And then, as if to confirm the gravity of the situation, the comms suddenly crackled to life, a distorted voice cutting through the static. "Captain Drake, I thought you'd never come. Welcome to the end of humanity." It was Garrett's voice. The trap was set. The Judgment shuddered violently as another wave of Tyrexian fire struck the crippled warship. Sparks flew from the console in front of Captain Alara Drake, and the lights flickered ominously. The ship was buckling under the onslaught, its systems desperately struggling to stay online. And yet, the crew of the Judgment held their ground. "Shields at 15%. Park shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "We can't take much more of this." Drake's heart raced, but her voice remained steady, cold. "Hold it together. We're not done yet." The Tyrexian fleet, led by Emperor Zlaris' flagship, closed in on them. The distance between the two forces was narrowing, and with every passing second, the odds of survival grew slimmer. But Drake refused to surrender. Not while humanity's future was at stake. Not while the anathema, the ghost ship from their past, loomed like a dark omen in the distance. "Quinn, any chance of pulling us out of here?" she asked, her voice laced with urgency. "We're already at maximum thrust, Captain." Quinn replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We can't outrun them, not with our systems in the state they're in." Drake's mind raced. There had to be another way. But the Tyrexian fleet was relentless, and the Judgment was fighting against a force far greater than it had ever encountered. Yet she refused to let fear take hold. She'd seen humanity rise from the ashes before. This wouldn't be the end. A new, unexpected signal suddenly popped up on her screen, one that made her freeze. It was a distress call from a human vessel, but it wasn't from Earth. It was from a flotilla of ships, long lost in the Outer Rim. Ships that had gone dark years ago. "Captain," Quinn said, his voice shaking, "you need to see this. A fleet. A human fleet. And they're headed straight for us." Drake blinked, disbelief flooding her system. Could it be possible? Reinforcements? Had command actually listened? Quinn zoomed in on the incoming fleet. The ships were battered, old, and scarred, but they were unmistakably human. The Vanguard, the Resolute, the Sentinel. These were the names of ships long presumed lost in the early days of the war, vessels that had disappeared in the far reaches of space. Who are they?" Park asked, his voice trembling as he scanned the unfamiliar ships. "They're the Lost Fleet," Drake whispered, realization dawning. "The ones that disappeared after the Tyrexian invasion of the outer colonies. They must have survived, hidden away, and now they've come back." The thought was almost too much to believe. After all this time, humanity's forgotten fleet was back, and they were heading straight for the heart of the Tyrexian invasion. But Drake didn't have time to revel in the miracle. The Tyrexians were already preparing their final assault. "Get us closer to the fleet," Drake ordered. We need to link up and fight together. Now. Quinn nodded, but before he could make the adjustments, another blinding flash of light exploded from the Terrorized flagship. The Judgment lurched forward, its hull scraping against the oncoming blast wave. Alarms blared and the ship buckled again, sending a jolt of pain through Drake's chest. She slammed her hand down on the command chair's armrest, determination burning in her eyes. "Park," she barked. "I need those guns online. Now." The weapons officer didn't waste a second. The Judgment's railguns roared to life, unleashing hell on the Terrorized fleet. The enemy flagship was hit with a barrage of plasma blasts, the force of the hits creating a brilliant explosion that lit up the void like a dying star. But the Tyrexians weren't done. In that moment of chaos, the trap sprang fully into place. A hidden weapon, concealed within the flagship, activated. A massive energy cannon, unlike anything they had seen, charged and fired in an instant. The beam tore through the Judgment's remaining defenses, hitting the bridge directly. Drake's vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was a blinding flash of light before everything went dark. And in that darkness, a voice echoed across the comms. "Captain Drake. It's over." The trap had been sprung. And humanity's last hope had just been extinguished.